Aaron Weinberg, Government Relations Manager at Israel Policy Forum. How you holding up over there?
I'm doing all right. Thanks so much, Rabbi Aaron, for asking. Thank you very much to you and Temple Emmanuel for having me. While I'm not with you physically and we're not all together, I've got great memories in 2016 of being based for a number of months in Pittsburgh while working on a presidential campaign. For those of you who watched The West Wing, you'll know the name Richard Schiff. We did a surrogate tour with him and brought him to Pamela's Diner in town, and having very, very fond memories of Pittsburgh and the Jewish community. Did an interview with the Jewish Chronicle. So I'm happy to be with all you all virtually and back in your community that I know is so strong.
That's awesome. And thank you for being with us. So where are you physically right now?
I am really incredibly blessed to be home with my parents. While I'm normally based in Washington, D.C. And work with lots of folks there, there's not much happening in person right now in Washington or anywhere else for that matter. So I'm back in Chicago in the house I grew up in my brother's bedroom, which I've made into my office. But I'm really blessed to be with them and to be together with family. And to be able to ride out this time together.
Wonderful. So many of my folks are going to be familiar with the Israel Policy Forum, though they may not remember the name because I used a lot of your materials extensively as we were doing classes on the second and the third and the fourth Israeli election in this recent cycle. But would you just start us off by telling us a little bit about what the Israel Policy Forum is?
Absolutely. So the Israel Policy Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit that's committed to Israel's future as the Jewish, democratic, and secure state through a negotiated two-state solution. Basically, what that means is that we believe in Israel's future to be a democracy, to be Jewish, and to be secure. And what we're able to do, and that we believe that there must be a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel next to a viable and just Palestinian state through final status negotiations between the parties. We have a partnership with a group called Commanders for Israel Security, which is a group of nearly 300 retired IDF generals, Israel Defense Forces generals, and heads of security services. And we partner with them to ensure that our analysis is rooted in the realities on the ground, and that our policy perspectives, policy positions, and prescriptions are partnered with the people who spent their lives defending Israel. We're not a PAC. We don't endorse candidates. We're not a C4. We don't engage in political work. We believe in policy over politics and in substance over slogans. And we have sort of two main constituencies in this work. The first is the American Jewish community, where we have worked since 1993 to engage the American Jewish community in all of the issues around the US-Israel relationship, where we in many ways have been the intellectual home for the two-state solution. And a more burgeoning group that I work with called American Policymakers, American Policymakers that consists mainly of congressional staff and members of Congress, candidates, political parties, and our job is to work with anybody who is committed to Israel's vision of Israel as a Jewish, democratic, and secure state. And so anybody who wants to do that, we're going to help them do that better. And so we are regularly a resource up on Capitol Hill in the political campaigns up and down the ballot, and everybody sort of in the larger policymaking conversation that works on these issues.
So you just used three words that I know are key to the organization, and I'm hoping you'll help parse out why those three: Jewish, democratic, and secure. It seems that there is often conflict among groups who want at least one or maybe two out of those three things. How do you hold all of those balls in the air?
So we believe that not only that while it's difficult to hold all of those balls in the air, it's absolutely necessary. So the basic premise is, Israel as a manifestation, realization of the Zionist dream of the Jewish people of thousands of years to return to their homeland, to live in peace and security in their borders, in their ancestral homeland. And we are part of the thousands of year old Zionist movement to seek to realize the Jewish people's yearning to return to their homeland. And we continue to be part of that tradition. Democratic, because we believe that fundamentally, in order for Israel to exist as a truly Jewish state and truly live up to Jewish values, that democracy is really critical. And that, you know, as we are committed to the precepts of democracy as all of the modern nation states of the world, those that flourish the most, those that are the most successful, and those that are most representative of their people are democracies. And we're committed not just to Israel as a democracy, but upholding democratic values and norms and standards. And secure, because as everybody knows very, very well, Israel is constantly under attack. Israel has no lack of threats on its borders, and we believe that Israel must remain secure, critically important in order for Israel to pursue any final status with the Palestinians or any peace with its regions. Israel must be acting from a place of security, and without that, there can never truly be peace.
Thank you. So Aaron is Government Relations Manager. What are you up to? What does that entail generally and right now?
It's very funny that you asked that, because today, just my crazy long day today has been so encompassing of so much of the work that I do. So I started the day meeting with a member of the Democratic Platform Committee. As many folks know, that in presidential years, both the Democrats and the Republicans have a convention to nominate their candidate. And part of that process is voting and affirming a platform which sort of states the values, intentions, and most importantly, policy of those parties. So I convened a number of members of our board of directors and had a very high level conversation with one of the people who's in charge of writing that platform, to have a really sophisticated and nuanced conversation about where the platforms should be in this upcoming election cycle, given all of the craziness and reality that is going on, both here stateside and also in Israel, which we can talk about later. I then went on to have a meeting with a very high profile senator's foreign policy advisor to talk about a letter that is being circulated in the Senate right now, talking about the dangers of unilateral annexation of West Bank territory, something that I hope that we'll get into more, as that's really been IPF's signature issue, and helping them figure out how to navigate both the politics and the policy around that initiative, and getting them to be comfortable with the policy that it's talking about. And then I spoke informally with a candidate running for Congress in Texas, who is dealing with a lot of the issues around the politicization of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and wanted some guidance of how to talk about Israel in a political context in a way that brings people together as opposed to pushing them apart. We want to unite and not divide. And then tonight I'm speaking with all of you and engaging the American Jewish community around these issues. So all of those things very much encompasses a lot of what I'm working on. It's a very small piece of the insanity that is the time, not just in the COVID time, but also in what's happening in Israel and what's happening in the States. But that gives you a little taste of what I've been working on.
I imagine every day is a little bit different, and that there are very few dull moments in what you do right now.
Yes, absolutely. Never a dull moment.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Israel, right? It is challenging in the best of times to know what is going on, right? Where they have media covering things from different angles, just as we do, and a political system that is somehow even more confusing than ours. But right now is a particularly challenging time, as things are moving both very quickly and not moving at all. What are you keeping an eye on? What has your interest in Israel right now?
Well, obviously the issue of annexation, but to sort of take a step back and just sort of bring everybody into what has been happening in Israel over the past months. I don't even know at this point, it's been over a year. the craziness of all the elections. So, many folks probably know that Israel had 3 elections in about the span of a year, for a whole variety of reasons of deadlocks. A number of weeks ago, there was a coalition agreement signed between Prime Minister Netanyahu and currently Speaker, head of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz. This was one of the most detailed, intense, insane coalition documents ever put together. It was many, many, many pages long, had section after section after section. And the result was the creation of probably the largest coalition government in the history of coalition governments, for sure, in Israel, with likely to be over 36 ministers. To give context, that's probably double or even triple the number of ministers that other governments have had. That had been challenged in the Supreme Court for validity on a number of legal bases. That they passed all of those hurdles. And so what we're really keeping an eye on now is the government was due to be sworn in, I believe, either tomorrow or Wednesday, but I think it was Wednesday. Secretary Pompeo has just announced, I think yesterday, either on Friday or Sunday, all the time, just sort of, there's a joke that basically during COVID, since nobody's leaving their house or doing anything, there's really only 2 days of the week, Shabbat and not Shabbat. And that's kind of what it feels like to me. And then Sunday, I start pulling out my email and doing work, and my parents tell me, but it's not work. I say, but it's not Shabbat. And they said, yeah, it's confusing, isn't it? So that's been a little bit of my struggles. But getting back on point, the Secretary Pompeo will be visiting Israel on Wednesday, so they're likely pushing back the swearing in of the government until Thursday. And as is true in Israeli politics, nothing is final until after it's final, and even then it's not final. So my sense is that certainly we are not out of the woods in terms of not having 4th elections yet, though it definitely seems unlikely that it would go that far. But until there is a government, and of course, the government's going to be extremely unstable, given that it is a quote unquote unity, quote unquote emergency government that's talking about the term of the government being 3 years long, unclear how that's an emergency. It's unclear what is going to happen. So the 2 main things that I am looking at are, 1, political instability, which we've delved a little bit into now and can talk more about, and 2, the issue of annexation. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but obviously it's likely to be on the agenda with Secretary Pompeo, given the active role that the US has played in its Peace to Prosperity document, and in fact promoting the idea of annexation of West Bank territory. And that is really the singular mission that our organization has been focused on for the past 2.5, almost 3 years.
So let's dive on into that, right? On the
Okay.
IPF website, there's a big old button that says Annexation Watch. This is indeed something that you have had an eye on. It's something that everybody should have an eye on, that the current administration and Peace to Prosperity is really pushing. Certainly seems to be an imperilment, an impediment to the 2-state solution that most American Jews, and if I've read your polling correctly, most Israelis support as well. Say a little bit more. What are you watching?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. It's really important. Annexation, I believe, is the single largest existential threat that the state of Israel faces today, in terms of ensuring its future as a Jewish, democratic, and secure state. It is critical, and it is also self-imposed Israel on itself. So what the basic idea of annexation is, right? Many folks know about annexation in the context of Crimea or other conflicts around the world, but the notion that Israel obviously currently has control over the West Bank after the 1967 war. And the idea would be what Israelis and Prime Minister Netanyahu are calling extending sovereignty, i.e. annexing or taking over full control legally of those territories. Now, you can see all these details on our website. I encourage you to go to Israel Policy Forum and click on the Annexation Watch website, and you can even download a really handy one-pager that you can see that's called, what is annexation? West Bank annexation fact sheet, which I think is really the most important. If you look at one thing, you should look at that, which details the research that we've done into annexation together with Commanders for Israel Security. Now, there's a number of different kinds of annexation that's being discussed. The first kind of annexation that's being discussed is the notion of partial annexation. That is what is promoted in the Peace to Prosperity document that the Trump administration put out as their peace plan. So what you will see is, even in Area C, which is the area designated in the post-Oslo process as being under full Israeli control of both Israeli military and civil control, if Israel were to annex just Area C, it would require building 169 new security barriers because what you have to understand is, it would be really easy if the West Bank was divided up into, okay, the top third is Area A, the middle third is Area B, the bottom third is Area C. But unfortunately, people call it the Swiss cheese of areas. And so there's all kinds of little pockets of settlements in all different parts of the West Bank. So Area C are the little pockets, little places, the little holes in the in the Swiss cheese of the West Bank that currently are under Israeli control, or I should say it's the filling around the cheese, around the holes, the cheese around the holes. You know what I'm saying. It's the end of a very long day. So, so in order to secure the border, the new border that would be in the West Bank, you would have to build, it would create 169 new islands of territory within the West Bank, which would, in order to secure those barriers or those quote unquote borders, you would have to build a barrier in order to secure it. And building that barrier on day one costs $7.5 billion, that's with a B, $billion, just on day one, with a $1.5 billion price tag annually. Now, I will remind you that in the Obama administration, we signed a memorandum of understanding, the largest memorandum of understanding between any two countries in the history of the world. And that was only just over $3 billion a year annually, right? So this is a dramatic and massive cost. And another number that will give you some context is, we'll get into that later about aid to the Palestinians. But full annexation of the West Bank. So let's say they don't just stop at Area C annexation, but they go for annexing the entire West Bank. That would require a cost of between $16 to $21 billion annually, and so the costs are insane in terms of manpower. Area C annexation, the limited annexation, would require calling up 25,000 IDF reservists just to patrol and man the new borders and the new barriers. And it would create the most indefensible set of borders in recorded history, right? Full annexation would require calling up every single active duty IDF soldier to permanently be stationed in the West Bank for basic law and order, basically turning one of the most advanced fighting forces in the history of the world in the IDF into normal police that you would get at the police station on the corner. And that would require taking every soldier off the border with Gaza, off the border with Lebanon, off the border with Syria, off the border with Jordan, off the border with Egypt, right? All of those, it would require all of those soldiers just for basic law and order. And it would force Israel, because of the population that would be absorbed into Israel's borders, to choose between either extending the right to vote to the Palestinians that live there, and likely no longer being a Jewish majority state, and therefore probably undermining the character of the state, or not extending citizenship and the right to vote to the Palestinians that live there, and no longer being a democracy. So we really view that this challenge of annexation, which likely, even if it started at a limited point, could very easily have what we call the domino effect, or a spiraling control that will ultimately lead Israel to force Israel to annex the entire West Bank. And I'm sure there's lots of questions as to why that is, but just one is, the Palestinian Authority, the body that governs the Palestinians currently, there's plenty of problems with it. There's also a lot of things that it does incredibly well, and importantly, including security coordination with Israel. It is not the most stable institution, and there are constantly threats to its existence. And if annexation, even a limited annexation, is the thing that causes the Palestinian Authority to dissolve or to crumble, then there is no governing body in the West Bank. And in order to prevent non-state actors like Hamas of coming into the West Bank and taking over, Israel would be forced to reoccupy the entire West Bank. So that's just giving you a little bit of a sense of the truly insane costs that are connected to annexation and the real serious existential threat that it is. And the last point that I'll add, because we after all are Americans and should talk about our role in this, is that not only was annexation included in the Peace to Prosperity document that the Trump administration issued, but fundamentally in the coalition agreement that was just signed, going back to the elections conversation between Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, it said that annexation would only take place according to the Trump plan and in agreement of the United States of America and in coordination with the United States of America. So not to get too into the weeds of the processes that have been going on by the bilateral negotiations. Usually when you're talking about bilateral negotiations in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you're talking about Israelis and the Palestinians. But here the joke is that the Peace of Prosperity document is a plan, a final status document and plan that has bilateral agreement, except instead of with Israelis and Palestinians, it's between Israelis and Americans. And so to not get into too deep into the weeds of all of that, just to say that the American role has been critical in moving forward the notion of annexation, and it even says in documents that are likely to be governing documents of this coalition that annexation cannot move forward without the agreement of the American administration. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to make our voices heard against these moves and for Israeli democracy to ensure that our government doesn't play the starring role in ruining Israeli democracy.
So I was playing around on the website, saw a recent briefing from Gilad Hirschberger and the commanders for Israel's security, where certainly Israeli support for annexation has been rising, but is still markedly less than the number of Israelis supporting the two-state solution. It doesn't appear to have the popular backing right now, and yet it is being fast-tracked in a fairly unprecedented way. Worth speculating what's going on, or shall we just let that linger?
I mean, I think we as Americans have a lot of experience in decisions being made that are against the will of the majority of the people, yet somehow come to effect. You don't need to look farther than the Electoral College. So the reality is that decisions made in political calculations are not always according to the will of the people. And I think what you are seeing, first of all, there's a fundamental lack of education and understanding within Israel about the realities of annexation. I mean, I think, sure, if you ask the average Israeli, would they be interested in annexing territory with no costs attached to it? A large percentage would say yes. And in fact, I believe there was another poll published even this morning that asked that very uninformed question. But once you put the question to them as, do you prefer separation or annexation? Vast majority of Israelis continue to support separation. And I think what we're seeing is the Israeli government not necessarily being responsive to their people, but rather being responsive to the wants, needs, wishes, dreams, aspirations of U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, and the Donald Trump administration.
So who are you looking at? Who are you listening to as you continue to follow these developments? Who should people be reading right now?
Well, obviously, the Commanders for Israel Security is really a group that I would point to as putting out excellent content, and we partner with them for all of our research. Most of their English language stuff is hosted on our website, israelpolicyforum.org. My boss, Michael Koplow, who's the policy director of the Israel Policy Forum, I believe is the most insightful analyst on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today. And I'm not just saying that because he's my boss. He's not even listening tonight. He won't even know that I said this. But I really believe one of the reasons why I came to work at the Israel Policy Forum after having a career in a variety of other places in Washington and in the American Jewish community was because of really the insightful nature of Michael's commentary and really the smart and strategic positions and policy analysis that he continues to put out. So I would highly recommend subscribing to his Koplow column. He writes weekly in the New York Jewish Week as well, and has a variety of other publications that come up from time to time. But looking for Michael Koplow's work, I'm unfortunately spending a lot of time on Twitter these days because that's where a lot of this conversation is being had. And so I'm on Twitter at Aaron WNBRG. You can follow me there. And the last one that I would say that people should look at is former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro. Whether that be on Twitter or his publications or speaking, I really feel he has been incredibly smart and continues to have one of the most insightful takes at sort of this intersection between the realities of what's happening in Israel and Israeli politics, the politics here in the United States, and the news between and the U.S.-Israel relationship. He really, I believe, manifests so much of those of us who are committed to this relationship are trying to further. And he actually wrote the foreword to our most recent study, which is called In Search of a Viable Option, which examines all of the options for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There was a large number, and it was authored by Evan Gottesman and Dr. Shira Efron, with Dan Shapiro, Ambassador Shapiro, writing the forward, and that is a really insightful study evaluating all of these options. And I'll give you the cheat sheet. The answer, the conclusion they came to is that the two-state solution by no means is perfect. There are a lot of really serious challenges to the two-state solution. There's a lot of things that stand in the way of it being implementable. There's a lot of things that make it not the ideal solution, but it is the only solution that is feasible for a secure Jewish and democratic Israel and a viable and contiguous Palestinian state. And so that is why the two-state solution is so important. So that is that's really the places that I'm turning to these days.
Wonderful, thank you. And a little bit more about IPF. If someone wants to follow what you are doing, wants to continue to learn, wants to support your efforts, I've posted the website in the comment box. What else might people be looking at or doing?
So I would make sure to sign up for our emails. There should be a way right at the top or right somewhere on the homepage to sign up for our emails. That's where you'll get all of our content. We're a great home for people who are looking for more stuff, who want to read more, who want to hear more, especially in these days of COVID. We have webinars every Tuesday at 2 p.m. If it's Tuesday, it's an IPF webinar day. So you can sign up to hear. We've had some incredible speakers, including Ambassador Shapiro and Dr. Khalil Shikaki with Gideon Hirschberger and a whole variety of others. And we're going to have some really, really exciting programs coming up for people who are maybe a little bit newer to this conversation. Tomorrow, we're going to be having what we're calling Annexation 101 with Dr. Colonel Shaul Arieli, one of the most distinguished researchers and a very high-ranking former military official who's going to talk about the fundamentals of annexation in much more eloquence and detail than I spoke about tonight, together with Yisrael Aron, another member of Commanders for Israel Security. And coming up as we get closer to annexation, to the date of July 1st, which the Israelis have set as the date that they're going to move forward with annexation, we're going to have more and more interesting and larger gatherings and content. So I really encourage folks to sign up for our email. And of course, if people are so moved in this and able in this time, of course, you can support us there as well.
Wonderful. And I think I would take this opportunity to remind people that though we are currently trapped, it feels like we are trapped at home, that there is a pandemic that is slowing a number of things in our lives. It's also also allowing other things to be happening beneath the media radar that are existential threats to the values we hold dear. And the Israel Policy Forum is one of the intellectual leaders on this front. You guys do an amazing job staying out of everything about Israel is political, and you stay out of the American, is AIPAC too far right or too not right enough? Is J Street too far left? Are they even Jewish? You avoid all of those questions and present vitally important information that I encourage everyone to check out. Aaron Weinberg, Government Relations Manager, Israel Policy Forum, I'm so grateful for your time. Stay safe, stay sane, and most importantly, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. And to everybody, stay safe, stay healthy. We're getting onto the holiday of Lag BaOmer, the time between Shavuot and Pesach, between the holiday of freedom and the holiday of Torah. Well, I guess they're all holidays of Torah, where we finally take the time that we've been counting and really take a moment to celebrate in the time of mourning. And I know my cousin has a sign outside his house counting the days of the Omer, but also counting the days of quarantine. So I encourage everybody as we enter this holiday to take a moment, even as we've been mourning the days of the Omer, to recognize that today, going into tomorrow, that we are able to celebrate a little bit in this time of isolation, all that we've been able to accomplish and all that we're able to do. And you, Rabbi Aaron, and the entire community of Temple Emmanuel, by gathering together and doing these things and continue to just show up as a community, are strengthening each other and strengthening the movement and the Jewish people in the world. And so I wanted to just offer deep and sincere gratitude from me and blessings, so that we can move into this holiday of celebration together, celebrating all that we have achieved as a Jewish people and all that you as a community has achieved in this troubling and difficult time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And from Temple Emmanuel, tell your dad we said hi.
Absolutely.
Great.